All right, our next speaker is again, I have the best job in, and I'm taking a quote from someone, a friend of mine, Suzanne Spooner. I had one of the best jobs in the universes. I get to meet, just amazing people all the time. And this little lady, we got to meet when I interviewed her on the radio show. And she is so precious, just so precious. She starts out just like everybody else. and then, it all just starts happening. Life just starts, she has questions and things just start coming up. And then the next thing you know, she's doing something strange. and then that's what her talks to me about. But she's like, she's wrapped in this little lady outfit, kind of like my mother was, And she'd get up there and people are going, what is going on, Here's this person, coming up there, just sweet little lady, and then opens her mouth and all this profound information comes out. And they're like, how on earth? But that's what's so beautiful. That's why I love this. I love this work. I love how this happens. And it also shows you how it's never too late. No, because and we were talking last night. We were at a dinner, and she had a choice. I hope it's okay if I'm not going to go into details, but she actually had a choice. It was like just a few years. Well, it was actually about the point that all this was happening, right? That the manuscript was getting accepted. Okay. Right. Okay, she didn't know the manuscript was getting accepted. And she... Just come on up here, Carolyn. You can help me with this story. I want to make sure I get it right. Carolyn grew Daly, and then she'll... I know I'm doing this unconventionally here. Yeah, you were telling us last night that she actually got the call that her manuscript was accepted.
That's okay. I'm not ashamed of it.
Yeah.
On my 82nd birthday.
Mm-hmm. Now, what else about the story was you were having a health concern.
Yes.
And she didn't know, she was asking for help from healers and everything, and it ended up being fine. But the way I saw it was because you found out it was fine after you got that you found out that it was accepted.
I had carcinoma, or I was diagnosed with carcinoma of the bile ducts. And in the same period of time, my husband died. So it was a difficult time. And I do think I had a choice because sometimes it didn't really matter which way I went. But I had a QHHT session with Patty, my dear, she's almost my adopted daughter. And a few other people who offered to use a healing practice on me. And when they removed the tumor, it was benign.
Yeah. And you made a comment last night that you said, well, for all intents and purposes, I was essentially gone.
Yeah.
It was like it was okay. It didn't really matter if I stayed or if I went.
Yeah.
So it was like she was at this point. See, there was a decision point.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, I don't know if anybody else just got them. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
And so it was like, and then you decided to stay. Or was it you got the news?
What I said was, God, this is in your hands.
Yeah.
Que sera, sera.
Okay. And then you got the call.
So it was evidently in God's hands, because everything after that, after they took me off the medicine that was worse than almost the disease, and I mean, I don't think I've ever felt better in my life.
Oh, yeah. And you look, look at you. You're so beautiful.
Thank you.
Oh, anyway, but I don't want to take away from your talk by telling any story, but I just think that's such a beautiful story, because
so
that is life starting over.
It is.
Yes.
It is.
And so,
yeah.
that's fantastic.
Just when you think it's the end, it's the beginning of something new.
Absolutely. So, yes. Okay. So, Carolyn's book is Opening to Fullness of Spirit, Discovering Secrets of the Soul Through Automatic Writing. Yeah.
I'm weird.
Exactly. See, you never know what packaging it'll come in. Okay. All right. So I turn it over to you.
Okay.
Carolyn Greer Daly.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you so much. And so with that introduction, I really don't need this slide. But the subject of my talk will be fullness of spirit, first of all. Open to it. Secondly, embrace it. And third, explore it. And then finally, when you get to my age, you live it. And should you ever decide to shake your fist at God and ask for truth, be prepared, because what happened to me. My book begins when it was an Easter Sunday morning, and I am an 8th grade Sunday school teacher in a Methodist church. And I got up to go to church and to take my children to church and to teach my class. And I didn't believe a darn thing I was supposed to be saying. It was a crisis of the soul. I had to tell my husband, who never went to church, to take the children and drop them off. I had to call my friend, Mildred, whom you'll meet later, and ask her to take care of my class because I was in no condition to do it. And so I went into the bedroom, and I slammed the door, and I got on my knees, and it wasn't, oh, please, God, I really need help. It was, God, I want truth. There have been so many conflicting things coming into my life that they didn't make any sense to me, and they hadn't for a long time. In fact, although my book begins on that Easter Sunday morning, my story actually begins when I was 8 years old. My mother had 2 requirements of me. I was to be Shirley Temple, but I failed. That was Shirley Temple. That was the way my mother saw me, wanted to see me. But I failed. I was a barefoot tomboy. This is the same girl, believe it or not. This is the same girl, about the same age. But my mother had a second requirement of me, and that was that I was never to challenge any question written in the Bible or spoken from the pulpit. And again, I failed. I asked adults a lot of questions that they didn't want to answer at all. And one day, coming home from church in the car, I announced, I don't want to go to heaven because God is mean. Okay. So there's a screech of the brakes. My mother grabs me by the collar and pulls us nose to nose and said, you know you'll go to hell for saying things like that. And so that didn't really improve my impression of God very much. And the reason I thought God was mean was on that Sunday sermon, the minister had said, this is what is required to go to heaven. You have to be a Baptist. You have to be immersed. You can't just be sprinkled. That doesn't get you there. You have to be immersed. And I'm thinking, 3/4 of my friends are Catholic. And I'm looking around the church and I'm thinking, and these are the people I'm going to be with? I think maybe I'd rather go where my friends were allowed. And then I thought, was God loving or was God cruel? I thought God was cruel because he wouldn't let my friends into heaven. But that wasn't all. One Sunday we heard about Jesus and God is love, forgive your anyone who sins against you, pray for your enemies, love your neighbor, and that sounded really good. I liked that God. Then the next Sunday, I go to church, and it's a different thing, different story. It's from the Old Testament. And God said to the children of Israel, go into the land of Canaan and smite every man, woman, and child. And I'm thinking, whoa, is that the same God that Jesus talked about? Is this the same vindictive God? And so that's why I thought God was really mean. And then why would God ask the children of Israel to go into the land of Canaan and smite children? Because in Mark 10:14, he said, suffer the little children to come unto me, for of such is the kingdom of heaven. So that didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. And so I wondered if there were two gods, a God of love and a different God that would say, go and kill somebody, and it was okay because God said so. And it was a God of vengeance. So my little 8-year-old brain just didn't wrap around that one. I could not figure out how that would work. And wasn't it the 10 Commandments of Moses when it said, thou shalt not kill? Was this the same God, or were there two gods? And later on, I thought, it almost sounded like he was schizophrenic, or... And so that was something I pondered almost my entire life. But I have my own theory of why that is written in the Old Testament and the New Testament is different. But I will get to that at a later point, when at the point in my life I came to a different conclusion. But being a good Baptist girl and trying to be Shirley Temple, I did toe the line. In the back of my mind, all of the stuff was still there, but I suppressed it because I didn't know which I feared most, God or my mother. And I didn't really want to offend either one of them. So I stayed in the Baptist church, and when I was at the age of 12, I was baptized. And I will say this, I felt a spiritual presence during that baptismal service. And I felt like the presence of Spirit. And it was like I thought, that's really what God is. It is not somebody who goes around asking people to kill, because the warmth and the joy, and I know that all of you felt when you first came in contact with spirit of pure love, and that is exactly what it was. And then later on, my husband, when we were dating, he decided to join the church because I had to be there every Sunday, and I had to be there on Wednesday nights, and I had to be there for things on Saturdays. And so in order to be with me, he joined the church. And after we were married, he never went back. So anyway, I guess that was kind of a compliment. But then years later, after we were married and we could finally afford a new house. Growing up where I grew up in D.C., I thought everyone who lived in a house was rich because we lived in a one-bedroom apartment. But in this new neighborhood, I met many new friends. It was a new subdivision, and people were moving in, young people like myself at the time, and we had young children. And it was a really lovely neighborhood, and a friend of mine asked if I would like to come to the Methodist Church. Well, of course, that would have been a sin, but I did it anyway. And I kind of liked it because there weren't near so many reasons to go to hell there as there was in the Baptist church. And my children liked it. They made friends there. And then I was asked to teach the 8th grade there. And because I knew most of the 8th graders anyway, I had one that was not quite that old, but would be, and my husband coached football for the boys club for the little boys, and some of them, and through the neighborhood, and so I said yes. And then I had to deal with something that had been suppressed for a long time, because I had lessons to teach that were from the Old Testament, lessons to teach that were from the New Testament, and they contradicted each other. And that is what kind of brought me to the point where my book begins, where on that Easter Sunday, here's this Sunday school teacher who doesn't believe a darn thing she's supposed to say, or she's conflicted at least. I don't know what was right, but that's when I shook my fist at God and demanded truth. My book, Opening to Fullness of Spirit, this is also where my book begins. I taught 8th graders, and the way that I kept discipline in the class was that I had a required lesson. They knew what it was. And I said, if we get through this, we can talk about absolutely anything that you want to talk about, because I felt like more than Moses parting the sea, that maybe 8th graders had things that were on their mind that would be really more pertinent to them than Moses. And it worked, because they couldn't get through the requirements fast enough so that they could spend their time. And they taught, and it was almost like group therapy. Anything that was on their mind, it was open to them. Okay, but this one surprised me. After class, three of the children came up to me and said, Mrs. Daly, can you be a Christian and believe in reincarnation? Whoa, I don't know. I haven't a clue. Okay, well, can we discuss it at the end of the class next week? And I said, yes, but I don't know anything about it. I'll have to go to the library and get some books. And they said, it won't be necessary. We have some for you. So sure enough, they showed up on my doorstep, and they had a stack of books. Most of them were pretty thick, and time was kind of running out, so I had to grab the thinnest one I could find. But it turned out to be the most profound book for a beginner in this search that we are on for truth and light and wisdom and love. 20 Cases That Tend to Prove Reincarnation, and it was written by Dr. Ian Stevenson, a professor at the University of Virginia. And I thought, well, if anything would have credentials, that certainly did. And I read the book, and after reading Dr. Stevenson's book, I thought, oh my gosh, this really sounds like it could really be true. And what has been taught to me as truth may have been church propaganda with a threat of fear, the threat of hell if you didn't abide by it. And so I asked myself, was this the answer to my prayer for truth? And I began to think, yeah, I think so. I think maybe this is, because when I prayed to God, or when I demanded with God, I also prayed that I would be given the wisdom and the courage to accept whatever truth there was, even if it was something that I didn't want to hear. And reincarnation had never crossed my mind. I had at one time, a long time ago, had read a book, or read in a magazine something about a story about somebody named Bridie Murphy that was over in Ireland, and a regressionist had brought up facts that had been validated, and then the church said, no, that's heresy. That was all debunked. And guess what? I believed the church. So now I was at the point where I didn't know what truth was, and I really wanted to know. Okay, the next book I picked up is the one that really changed my life. I started to read Ruth Montgomery's A Search for Truth, and I got about maybe 2 or 3 chapters into it, and this woman said she could put a pen to the paper and it would just write all these spiritual things, all by itself. And I thought, bull. There is no way that can happen. But I decided to try it anyway. I had to overcome a lot of fear, and especially with the church I'd been brought up in, because it was really fear-based as far as anything that I thought was fun would send me to hell. So I started, and I was serious about it. So when I started to do it, I said the words to an old Baptist hymn, which was, "Have thine own way, Lord, have thine own way. Thou art the potter, I am the clay. Mold me and make me after thy will, while I am humbled, yielded, and still." And then there's a jerk. What was that? That wasn't me. Another jerk. And then some squiggly lines. And I'm thinking, I'm not doing this. There's this pen, and it's moving by itself, and it's making squiggly lines. And I dropped the pen and ran out of the room, got my breath, decided to come back. And then it started to make the letter L across the page. And I thought, well, at least that I can see what it is. And then it wrote. And then I thought, the letters became words, and words became a phrase. And this is what it wrote. And let's see if I can smart enough to use this thing. Okay, it was writing lovely or lonely here, and it was all one word, or lovely here. Because it wasn't my handwriting, I didn't know the difference between the N or the V. So, with my background, it came from hell. So, I wanted so much to confide in someone, so I called my friend Flora. She was the only one that didn't go to the Baptist church. And so I called her, and she was also teaching Sunday school in the Methodist church where I was teaching. She was teaching 9th graders. I had the 8th graders. So I'm corrupting the entire junior section here. So I called her. She's packing up to go to England, and I'm thinking, it's really poor timing on her part. Just when I need her, she's going to take off and go to England. But I told her what was happening, and I told her about the lovely here or lonely here, and I really did not know which one it was. But she was fascinated. And so then, after I finished talking to Flora, I went back and picked up the pen again, and then this took a lot of courage. And I put the pen down, and it wrote, "Fear not, my child, I am with you always, Jesus." And then I knew that it wasn't lonely there at all. It was lovely there. And I felt so relieved, temporarily. I started receiving messages, and I wanted to, first of all, I was asking who's writing this, and I didn't get any answer. And then I get this thing, "My beloved Carolyn." And I go, whoa. And then it goes on and on. It's getting pretty mushy. And I said, "Who is this?" And it wrote, "Lover John." I don't know anybody named John. But the letters were interesting. I must admit I was fascinated to be receiving letters from some entity. I didn't even know there were entities. But the receiving these messages. And then Then he started using the name Ellen also. And then I thought, why is he calling me Ellen? And I really didn't know until much later on under a regression that, yes, long time ago, I was Ellen, and I was married to John. And he still loved me. But this presented a problem with my marriage. I have all of these letters from this lover, John, to Carolyn. I had to hide them. First of all, I had not confided in my husband as yet that I was even doing this because he's so left-brained, I didn't even dare. He was the last person I would have confided in at that point. And I certainly wasn't going to confess to him. I mean, if I showed him the letter and said, okay, this is a love letter to me from a man who lived hundreds of years ago, and it's his ghost, and I was married to him, and he still loves me. I don't think the marriage would have lasted. I probably would have been sent to some place to cure me. And so I held back from telling him for a long time. But finally, when I did, which was much later, I told him, I'm doing something called automatic writing, and I sit down and it writes this stuff. And I showed him one of the good ones. It writes all of this beautiful stuff. I showed him a poem that had come. And I was afraid that I had rehearsed, oh my gosh, I had rehearsed what I was going to say to him when he said, Carolyn, stop this stuff. And I was going to say, no, I'm not. I have to be myself, and you have to accept me for me. But that just wasn't his reaction. His reaction was, what's for dinner? So it took him a long time to accept that. And when I was dealing with the letters from John that was giving me some insight into a past life as Ellen, I was really wanted to remember her. If that had been a part of me, I wanted to remember that part of me. And so, as I was working with that, then I received this poem. Memory is shadow in a dimly lighted room, carried on the breath of past, stirred by its perfume. There's a door that will not open, yet neither will it close. Is there a world beyond that door where memory freely flows? The light of truth holds the key to reveal that sacred spot of days not quite remembered, but never quite forgot. A haunting bit of memory, a hushed and whispered cry. Never can they live again, but never truly die. And I think all of us have been in that place at one point in time when we're trying to call on our inner selves. Flora was in England, and the only other person, and I really took a lot of courage because she was the 7th grade teacher in the junior department. I mean, I had the whole Methodist church corrupted. And it was all because of the children, they brought it on. But I invited Mildred to my house. Mildred was the closest person to a saint that I have ever known in my life. She was so loving to everybody, so unjudgmental. And she could see the good in everybody and everything, but I wasn't so sure that she would see this because although the Methodist Church was a little bit more liberal than the Baptist Church, it probably would not have gone along with this. So I invited her to my home for lunch. And I explained to her what had been going on, and I gave her a pad and a pencil, and we're sitting across the kitchen table, and I'm sitting there saying a silent prayer, and her pen, she said, Carolyn, the hairs on my arms are standing on end. And I looked down, so are mine. Hers is writing right away, and you could even read it. Mine starts out as squiggles and then turns into words, and Mildred picks up the pen the first time, and there she goes. And I thought, wow. And during this time, Mildred and I began to exchange whatever we received in our writing every morning on the telephone. That was like the news of the day. What did you receive? What did you receive? And she had a sister in North Carolina. Her name was Hattie. I thought she was elderly at the time, but now I don't. But she was very ill and not expected to live. And so Mildred said in the morning that she had received a message from Hattie, that Hattie had crossed over, and she was explaining how beautiful it was, and the people that she saw, and the welcoming. And she said she didn't want to come back, but the kids had prayed for her to heal, and she had wished that they hadn't. But that was in part of that isn't in it. She just described heaven, and Mildred was assured that any minute she would receive the telephone call, and Hattie would have passed over. But it didn't happen. Hattie ripped out all of the life-preserving things, the breathing things, the breathing apparatus, all ripped them out, and everybody just, okay, this is her time, we'll let it take its course. But she didn't. She got better. So Mildred and I are questioning the writing then. Why did you receive this? And because it wasn't true, because Hattie lived. But Mildred went to a family reunion, and Hattie took her to a side and said, Mildred, I can only tell you this because nobody will believe it. But when I was in the hospital and so sick, I died and I saw heaven. I asked Mildred if Hattie would write me a letter and tell me all about it. Back then in the 70s, I had never heard of a near-death experience, nor had anyone else I knew of. And this was the first time I had ever known anybody to go to heaven with a round-trip ticket. And I have her letter is contained in my book, and it's beautiful. She's a lovely lady, not well-educated, but very sincere, and her letter comes across as such. And then finally, Flora comes back. And while she was in England, she started trying to do automatic writing. Unfortunately, I think she chose the wrong place because she was in a pub with her aunt. And so when she started to write, and we were working together, I would go to her house or she mine, and we would sit across the table, we would say a little prayer, and then we would let the pen go. Well, she received drawings. Whoops, did I go one too many? She received drawings. This was the first one of the ship. It had a little bit of writing on it, but she had no idea what that was going to be until after she looked at it. And then she got this one of the child in the carriage, and the messages were not uplifting like mine. And then one day she was doing it with her husband across the table, and she said she sat there, and it seemed like hours and hours and hours, and this pen is just going all over the place. And she said, it's not making any sense. And he said, don't stop, Flora. You're drawing upside down. And when she turned it around, that's what she saw. And Flora and I then, Flora, Mildred and I, although Mildred was working full time, so she didn't have as much time as Flora and I had to spend on this. One day when I was at Flora's, and we were talking about what is truth. Because, I mean, everywhere I went, there was some kind of conflicting thing that said this is true and then this is true, and yet they both can't be true. And it was that the strongest desire to know what truth is. And I received this poem. Truth haunts us like a beautiful song written long ago. music of a forgotten past and a life we used to know. We've shrouded her in veils of doubt, and so she walks in scorn. With ridicule her companion, we neither weep nor mourn. She comes so close and yet so far as we see her pass us by, for in the blindness of our mind, we mistake her for a lie. And then another poem came. These were coming fast and furious then, and they did not come from me. Lies come dressed in beauty, like the purity of snow, falling as if from heaven. So how shall mortals know? Lies with facades of truth, and truth with facades of lies. The masquerade goes whirling by, too fast for human eyes. But above the surface, Flora and I were working with our homemakers club, and we like to have parties, and this was one of them. We had a Roaring 20s party. That is Flora, that is me, that is Flora's husband, and these two guys, we just dragged them in. But we were having a good time on the surface, and at the same time, we had secrets. We had a war raging on, and I wondered if all of this stuff made me a saint or a sinner. In the sinner, I would be doomed to hell, or am I just a human being in search of truth? So this brought me back to my roots. And I thought, okay, I know the Bible well. I've read it. It was drummed into me when I was a kid, and now I'm a Sunday school teacher. I know the Bible. But I decided to read it, the New Testament anyway, with no preconceived ideas or interpretations that had been forced on me. I decided to read it as if I were reading it for the first time. And so I turned to the scriptures, and I was so shocked. This is from the Good News of Modern Man, and this is the New Testament that I used. And in Matthew 11, verse 10, then the disciples asked Jesus, "Why do the teachers of the law say that Elijah has come first?" From the lips of Jesus, he said, "Elijah does indeed come first," Jesus answered, "and he will get everything ready." And verse 12, "But I tell you this, Elijah has already come, and the people did not recognize him, but treated him just as they pleased." Then the disciples understood that he was talking about John the Baptist. John the Baptist was Elijah reincarnated. Why had I not seen that before? Because somebody had said, that's what it says, but that's not what it means. So I wondered why, when the Bible was printed, was that not accepted? But these were the words of Jesus, and reincarnation was accepted by his own disciples. So why had the rest of the Christian world turned their back on it? And then, this is what really blew me away, because I'd heard this story so many times in the Bible. When Jesus was questioned about a woman at the well who was supposedly a prostitute, Jesus bent over and wrote on the ground with his finger, stood up and uttered the most profound and most quoted verses in the whole entire scripture. "Whichever among you is without sin, let him cast the first stone." And we've all read that. And yet, why did Jesus stoop down and write in the sand before he said that? Well, he prayed to his heavenly Father. Why not hear from him in writing? And so that made me feel an awful lot better. And then later, it's funny, being raised in the church all my life, and I'm coming across these verses, and I'm reading them probably for the 100th time, and now all of a sudden, they mean something entirely different. And this is from John 13:16. When the Spirit of truth comes, he will guide you into all truth, for he will speak whatever he hears, and he will declare to you all things that are to come. I had prayed for truth, and now I believe my prayer was really being answered, and I found it where else? In the Bible. So at this point, with validation from the Bible, I trusted my writing a lot more, although, and I was really embracing it. It had become really a very important part of my life. And I think this was about the time I broke the news to my husband, and he was more interested in dinner. So I knew I was off the hook. I didn't have to worry about, I could tell him about it, he could listen or not listen, and I didn't need to cool it, so to speak, or hide it. And so that was really going very well, and I was embracing it with everything, and then along comes Flora's writing. Now, whether or not this entity, Richard, was one that was hanging around the pub in England or one that latched onto her later, but she was receiving ugly words, ugly. And so we said that also during that same time, if you all heard of the movie The Exorcist, well, that was number one in the box office at that time. So this was a person who was possessed by a demon, and everything Flora wrote was almost demonic. And she is a nice, lovely, lovely lady, and it didn't make any sense at all. So my first thought was, okay, Richard, go to hell from whence you came and leave Flora alone. And I thought, that's probably not nice. So I said, we both got together and went, okay, we are going to pray for Richard to go into the light. So we are praying for Richard to go into the light. Well, we didn't work very well as exorcists because he didn't. He was hanging around till it reached the point where Flora just totally quit automatic writing. But at the same time, she was very intrigued with my writing. So I would go to her house or mine, as I said, and we would sit down and write. And then I got the craziest message, made absolutely no sense at all. Blazing fires in Louisiana, and Louisiana was spelled with a Z, and I'm not the greatest speller in the world, but I knew better than that. And it was telling us that 7 people would perish, and this was written in the afternoon of November 27th. And Flora and I agreed that there were probably fires in Louisiana every day of the week, and for this to make any difference whatsoever, it would have to make the front page of the Washington paper. It did. One difference on this, my writing came on November 27th, and this appeared in the Washington paper on November 30th. And it said in the paper that 6 people had perished. My writing said 7. And then we got to the last paragraph of the article, and it said 1 woman was 7 months pregnant. So if I ever needed validation that this was not coming from my brain, my subconscious, or anything else, this certainly did it. Also during that time, my husband was being transferred to Virginia, and we were going to leave Maryland, which I didn't really want to do, but his office was moved. And I was getting messages that bluebirds would lead me to a new home, and always, all my life, I loved stone houses, but I never thought I could afford one or I would ever have one. But this was promising me that I would move to a stone house and the bluebirds would lead me there. This is also the same time that the Watergate investigation was going on. And I received a message, "Grief for President, Oval Room will tell." That made no sense to me at all. I knew the president was having difficulties, to say the least, but, and it said, "Oval Room will tell," like the room could talk, and it used Oval Room, not Oval Office. And then one day, I was driving over to the property that we were going to buy to move to in Virginia. It was in Haymarket, Virginia. And I had an all-news station on, and the announcer came on and said, "More grief for President. Oval Room has a voice." The Oval Room had been taped. That was another validation. They found out that, and this man by the name of Butterfield, well, anyway, they found tapes in there, and they got some of them were erased, I think. And they were wrong about the house too. And this is what kind of put the brakes on for me doing this, was that we went over to the property, and sure enough, there was a bluebird, and I hadn't seen one since I was a child on the farm. And so I was sure that I was going to have my stone house. And then we went with the contractors, and we couldn't afford it. So I had a brick house. And not that my mind did that, because the house was really nice, but I thought, they're not telling me the truth. I don't want false promises. I want what is truth. Even if I don't want to hear it, I want truth for what it is. And so I totally gave up writing for a while. With Flora in Maryland and me in a new subdivision and false promises, I kind of pushed my writing aside. And I had decided I wasn't really interested in receiving anything that wasn't true. So, until Flora called me, and there was something going on in her family, and some kind of a conflict, and she asked, "Would you please sit down and see if your writing will tell me anything that will be helpful?" And so I said, "Oh, okay." And so I did. And I get this crazy message. Seagulls live at the sea. Duh, who doesn't know that? And if this is a message for Flora grew up in Maine, and if anyone knew where seagulls lived, it would be Flora. And it made no sense. And until I received a phone call from a childhood friend, and she asked me if I could come over to be with her, that something really horrible had happened. And so I hopped in the car. I had folded up the paper because my husband and I were going to a ball game in Maryland that weekend, and I thought I'd give it to her, and sometimes it's so scribbly it's hard to read anyway. Maybe there was something in there for her, but I had that folded in my purse. And my friend breaks the news to me that her husband, her stepfather of the children, had been molesting her 12-year-old daughter. And we both cried. And then she said, a seagull came to her windowsill and started squawking so much that she got up out of her bed and went into her sister's room and told her what had been going on. And after we read more of what was written in there, it also said, "Mother, do not feel guilty. This is not your fault." Because she, at that point, was wondering why she hadn't seen what was going on and put an end to it. And then my husband decided that we needed to move to the country to retire. And again, I was reluctant to I was so dug in with moving, and he was like a gypsy. But I did love the country. I loved the times that I spent on the farms, as you noticed with my pet pig. And so I went out to look at some land, and there were bluebirds again. And the first thing I did is put up a bluebird house. And that was in September so that my daughter could start school and start her freshman year in high school at the new school rather than breaking it up. And so we rented a farmhouse for a while, And all the time, I'm still getting this thing that I would move in November. Well, this was September. I'm certainly not going to move in the house in a couple of months. And when I asked the builder, how long will it take to build a house? He said, well, probably 7 months. I said, well, if Murphy's Law was applying and everything that could go wrong went wrong, how long would it take to build a house? And he said, well, stonemasons are kind of slow, so it could possibly take a year. But then this was September. The following November was long past that. Well, I did find a stonemason, and it was within the price range. And just about the time he was getting ready to put the stone in, he had to have quadruple bypass surgery. So I thought, oh, there goes my stone house again. And so I kind of gave up on it. I contacted some other stonemasons, and their prices were high. I wanted stone that looked like stone that grew out of the ground. I didn't want this shaped that didn't look natural. I wanted it to look really natural. Well, they brought over the stone. I didn't like the stone. I couldn't afford the price. So I called the old stonemason back and said, could we buy stone from your source, because I like the stone that you brought over for me? And he said, this is really funny, Mrs. Daly. I just came back from the doctor's office, and my wife doesn't even know yet, but I've been given permission to go back to work. And so I moved into my stone house. And there were bluebirds, and there are still bluebirds. And one of the things I had asked early on in my writing was, what is the most important thing that I need to do in my life? And the answer was elevate your level. Well, at that point in my development, I didn't know what they meant. It could have been anything, financial, educational, almost anything. Of course it meant spiritual, but I wasn't wise to that yet. But they were saying in the writing that when I moved to the stone house that my level would elevate. Well, as it turned out, I found a church in Charlottesville, Unity Church in Charlottesville, where not only was automatic writing accepted, but I wasn't the only one that was doing it. So there was a place where I could be myself. And I took a course in miracles, and we formed a little group there and gave some talks. And so this was my very first one, and it was at a workshop in Orange, Virginia, at a place called Mayhurst in 1992. And then I guess it was in August, my cousin called me, and they were camping nearby, and they asked that I come down and join them at their campsite. And it turned out that it was one of those nor'easterns in the middle of August, and it was cold and rainy and blowy. We couldn't swim or fish or do anything, and the tents weren't even very comfortable. I said, but I'd heard about this place on top of Afton Mountain called Swannanoa, where Walter Russell, who was President Roosevelt's artist, had the Four Freedoms and some other artwork up there. I said, let's just go up there. And so my cousin and I went. And as we were walking, the gardens were absolutely beautiful. But as we were walking from the garden, down the garden steps, and there was this cosmos flower that was coming out. All the other cosmos flowers were blooming to their full potential, and they were in the garden intended. This one was growing to its full potential between a rock and a hard place, literally. And I thought that was such a good symbol of people. And so I had used them as get well cards, and then I had been using a verse that someone else had written. Well, when they started to publish the book, they asked if I could write a little poem for this, and it came like just immediately. And this is what it said. It matters not where your seed may fall. in the garden or the garden wall. It matters only that you know God is with you wherever you grow. And so that is a bookmark in my book now. And they told me to write a book about that time, and they told me to call it Opening to Fullness of Spirit. And I'd also ask what I should pray for, and they said, pray only for the fullness of spirit, because that is all anyone really needs. When you pray for others, don't ask for specifics, just ask for fullness of spirit. And so that was the start of it. And I was surrounded by like-minded people. And so I began to put the book together. Not ever in my wildest dreams did I think I would be standing here giving a talk on it. And so, but I began to explore it with my daughter, which was fun. When she was in high school, or almost in high school, I finally told her. I was afraid to tell her about the writing earlier on, but I told her later. Well, she latched onto it, and she said, let's go to some haunted places and see what happens. And so we did. The first place we went was Mackinac Island, which is up at the point in Michigan. And there was a haunted, it had at one time, at the turn of the century, it had been a boarding house for workers who came to work on the island. And there had been a suicide there, and it had been told by some of the workers that were staying there now that this ghostly woman would come in and scare the bejeebers out of them. And so my daughter said, let's go. And I said, okay. So we go up there, and all of my writing had been so beautiful. The only ugly words I had ever heard in my life were from Flora's Awful Richard. And I sat down in front of that house, and it starts to write, go to hell, lady. And I told my daughter, I wouldn't take this from anybody living. I'm sure as heck not going to take it from some darn ghost. And she said, no, Mom, you're stronger than that. You're stronger than that. Keep it up. Tell her we love her. So we're there. We tell her, don't be afraid of us. We love you. We accept you. And whatever is bothering you can be forgiven. You can go to the light, and where there is love and peace, and just look toward the light. Well, then she gave us her story. And it seems that at the turn of the century, when a young lady became pregnant before she was married, she was called a whore. Her mother called her a whore. And the guy who was perpetrator, he abandoned her. He was probably already married, she thought. And so we did continue to talk to her, and pretty soon we were getting beautiful messages from her, thanking us that we didn't condemn her. The next place we went was Niagara-on-the-Lake, and the Canadian side of the Niagara Falls. And my daughter had said, I found a ghost, and he lives in this place called the Old Angler's Inn, Old Angel Inn. And people who go there to eat or sleep, and he bothers them all the time. And she said, let's go. I said, okay. So we go and we sit in this restaurant. Now here I had been keeping this thing a big secret. We're in a restaurant full of people. And my daughter brought her friend Adrian with her. And we're sitting at this table, and I'm down there doing this, and the girls are like this, and people are, what's going on over at that table? And it was hilarious. This guy wasn't mean, but he was funny. He was flirting with those girls, 2 single girls. And they thought it was funny. But then also, in all of that other writing, I was getting this thing about 7 young men. Well, with 2 single girls and an old mother, the girls said, we each get 3 and you get 1. And I said, okay, if I get the first pick, because I'd rather have one good one than 3 that aren't. And so we laughed and joked about it for a couple of days, and Adrienne had wanted to walk through the graveyard because she felt like she was doing a little genealogy, and she thought maybe she could find some ancestors that she thought had lived in that area. So we're walking, and Adrienne and I the 3 of us are walking together, and all of a sudden my daughter Cindy, she takes off, like leaving us in her wake. And we couldn't figure out what it was, and we walked around the corner, and there were the graves of 7 young men who died in 1874 aboard a yacht out there in I guess it's the Niagara River. And they wrote a story too, which is also contained in my book. And now the 4 parts of my speech, this is the end, because this is living in the fullness of spirit, which is what I feel like I'm doing now. First, I had to open to it. I had to trust it and embrace it, and then explore it to see what else could come from it. And now I feel like I do. The Gnostics that I didn't know about at the time I got the name of my book use the word preloma, I think it is, preroma, which means fullness, and that was the ultimate objective of their religion, which my religion said was heresy, so that's probably the reason I hadn't looked at it before. But I think that living in the fullness of spirit means that you are in always the awareness that you are surrounded by loving souls who are there to help you. And also, living in the fullness of spirit definitely does not mean that you don't have issues. Challenges will come. But when the challenges come, you know that you have a support system, and you can determine that, okay, this is terrible, but I can't do anything about it. My favorite prayer was, God, this is in your hands, que sera, sera. And this is getting to the point where when I was talking to Julia, my husband came down with Alzheimer's. And if any of you have ever dealt with that, you know what I was dealing with. I was also facilitating a class, a book study group, that was based on the books of Paul Selig, and it's channeled. And that was my outlet. That was the day. He wasn't at the point that I couldn't leave him alone. I couldn't for very long, but for those few hours in the day, at that point in time, he was doing pretty well. So that was my lifeline. And I enjoyed it, and the people there were wonderful. And then one day, my husband got lost. And I knew that I wouldn't be able to do any more with the class, so I told him it would be my last day, and that it would be 24/7 with my husband from now until I couldn't do it anymore. And I came home and I turned on the computer to inform my family and friends that Tim had gotten lost. He had stopped at a doctor's office, a retired doctor's home. The retired doctor called me and told me that he was lost and directed him back home. And I knew after that it was 24/7. And when I opened my computer, the first email there was from a dear friend, and he said, Carolyn, I would like to help you with Tim, but the only time I have available is Wednesday afternoons. And that can't be coincidence. That is not coincidence. But I also consider fullness of spirit is living in a space. This is a banner that I drew for church. And to depict where meditation takes you. And although life will always have its stormy seas, you can rise above it and focus elsewhere. And so I decided to let go, let God, and put my life in God's hands. And during the time I was sick, I received a letter through a friend. I had, during this time, I guess I forgot to tell you about my own problems. But I had gone with a healing group in Pennsylvania, and I got sicker than I'd ever been in my entire life. I came home and went to the doctor. I was diagnosed with the carcinoma as I spoke here with Julia. And then my husband died, and I couldn't hold a pen in my hand, so I was doing no automatic writing. And a friend called me, and she had just had a reading at Virginia Beach from a psychic who said, there is an entity named Timothy who wants to communicate, but the only way he will do it is through automatic writing. And my friend Ann said, well, Carolyn, you're the only one I know who does it, and you have a husband named Tim, but he's still living. I said, no, Ann, he isn't. He died a month ago. And so she came over, brought me lunch, and did some shopping for me. And so we sat down, and I tried to write. I couldn't hold a pen in my hand because the medication they were giving me for nausea was giving me the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. And I didn't know if it was permanent because I had no idea it was from the medication. I thought it was from the surgery. And so I called a friend from Unity Church who also does automatic writing, and I asked her if she would do it for me. And she did. And I received a beautiful love letter from my husband. And he said that although he seemed not in tune with what I was doing, that he heard a lot more than I thought he did. And he said, and you know, I'd never like to say this, but you were right. It is not. Okay, now, in the beginning I said, was God a loving God or a mean God or a moody God? But this is the conclusion, and this is all mine. This is just my total idea. But there are false prophets now. You know a lot of people who pretend to be psychics who really aren't, who give false information, who make a lot of money on things that are hoaxes. It disturbs me that people will do that, but it does happen. And so I thought, well, there was Jim Jones. He said he was speaking for God. People believed him to the point that they drank his Kool-Aid. There was David Koresh, who said he was the voice of God, and people burned to death in his retreat in Texas. And there was Marshall Applewhite, who had a big, all of his followers committed suicide together in a temple in California, I think, and called Heaven's Gates. And then there was Warren Jeffs, who claimed that he was the voice of God, and many people followed him. And if the Bible had been written according to his disciples, children brides would have been a part of their doctrine. And so just as we can disregard those people, I think that there were those in the Bible who wanted to do their own thing, and they wanted to blame it on God, and therefore it would excuse them of any wrongdoings that they wanted to, anything that they wanted to do. And Susan B. Anthony, and I can read it better up there. I distrust those people who know know so well that what God wants them to do, because I'd rather, what is it? Would somebody else read it for me? I can't see it.
Because I notice it always coincides with those with their own desire.
Yes. And I guess the rest of you can read it better than I can. It didn't come out very well on here. So my new life began in 2015, and I was, as I said up here when Julia was with me, I was at my cousin's house, and I received this email from this lady I didn't know. Her name was Nancy Vernon, and I opened the email, and it said, if you haven't signed a contract already, we would like to offer you one. And this has opened up a whole new life for me, and I can't wait to see what comes next. Thank you. Is there time for questions? If anybody wants questions?
We have like 15 minutes.
Okay. Do you want to do that? If there's anybody who has any questions? No questions? Okay. Okay, well then. Okay, there's a question. Good.
Have you gotten any messages about future events like you did about Watergate pertaining to the political climate?
Yeah.
Would you like to share?
Yeah, I did, but I prefer not to share them.
Thank you.
After it happens, I'll tell you all about it. Yes.
Hi. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm just wondering if you can give a live demonstration.
Oh, yeah, I have a workshop.
Okay, right.
I have a
okay.
workshop.
You're doing it here?
I will be doing it here.
Okay.
I'm not sure. When is my workshop? On Sunday. Monday.
Monday
Okay.
morning.
Okay, on Monday. And I do, and I love to do it. Oh, my friend left, except one of them is still here. This is part of the group that I meet with in Pennsylvania, and I worked with them with doing automatic writing, and they're all into it big time.
Can anybody learn to do that writing? I've tried, and I just sit there and nothing comes.
Well, I firmly believe that there's nothing special about me. I think that it was my determination to figure out what truth was, and by praying, emotionally praying for truth, then it came. But I don't think you can push it too much. But if you set up a time, this is the best thing that I think that I did. I followed Ruth Montgomery's procedure, which is to set aside a special time, about 15 or 20 minutes every day when you have a quiet time, and make it specific, like you're making an appointment with them, and meditate for a few minutes and hold the pen there. And generally, it'll just be like a little jerk to start with. And then it'll be squiggles. You get squiggles quite a lot before they learn the language.
I can't even read my own writing right now.
Well, I'll tell you something about this. It won't be your writing.
Okay. Well, that's a good thing.
My writing, mine is different at different times even.
Yeah.
But it doesn't bear any resemblance whatsoever to my writing. None of it ever has.
Really?
And it doesn't break mine. Mine takes some deciphering because it does not break between words. Mm-hmm. It does not dot I's or cross T's. And so sometimes there can be little mistakes. Well, one of them was kind of interesting because I was getting the A and then V-E-R-Y and then, something going on. And I kept getting it, and I'm thinking, a very what? A very what? And my daughter was at that time looking for a house, and she hadn't decided on one, and she asked me about it, and I got this a very something or another. And I said, all I am getting is this A-V-E-R-Y something. Her house is on Avery Road.
Oh. I also want to make a comment. My life is it kind of follows yours. I'm 83. I had a stroke. I've had cancer. I'm just recovering from cancer. And I just can't believe that it has gone the same way. And I'm definitely at peace with everything. And I went through all this. If you want to take me, take me.
Yes.
And it was my children that made me. I had said, I will not, because of my advanced age, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to let this play itself out. And my children, and this is one of my daughters, they convinced me that I should stay. And I wouldn't want what I've gone through to happen to anybody. But I have learned so much. It's been a learning, growing experience.
Me too. I know exactly where you're coming from.
I know you do.
And there is so much more for you to do.
Well,
That's the feeling that I got. I told God, you're going to have to take really good care of my health. At my age, with all the things you want me to do now, I better be nice and healthy for a long time.
I know.
And I am.
It's not easy, is it? Thank you.
Do you have any experience with people who speak several languages
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
people who speak several languages, automatic writing, which language do they use?
Well, mine has always been in English. But there have been words that have come in there that had been a foreign word that I didn't know what it meant, but it was in context with the English that turned out to be in sequence of what it should be. But it was only like a word once in a while. But I have heard, especially of a young boy who was hospitalized. He was in a coma, and he started to speak, and he started to speak in an ancient Greek language, and there was one doctor that they called up that would recognize it, and it was a Greek prayer.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, well, if that's it, thank you all for coming, and thank you for inviting me.